disclaimer. The views of the guest and even the host sometimes are not necessarily the views of the Work With Me podcast and Ruse advisors.
Welcome.
Work. Preparing for the interview. Picking your final candidate. Going over the offer. On-board training. Being let go. All things work-related from the employee and employer side are fair game here at the Work With Me podcast. Interact with us at workwithmepodcast.com. Email us at bob@ruseadvisors.com or Larindy at ruseadvisors.com. Your tough boss is Larindy Ruse. Your slacking employee is Bob Stei. And the fun starts now. How you doing, everybody? Welcome. Big thanks to Vince Rocco last week. We had a great conversation with him. Covered everything from his podcast to real estate to Jennifer Aniston. We have so much fun with the guests here. You can reach out to us, Bob at ruseadvisors.com, Larindy at ruseadvisors.com. Great guest for us today, Cathy Hobbs. We're going to geek this one up a little bit again because she's involved with everything from home design, she has her own company, to television news. She, you might have seen her on Channel 11 in New York for many years, but I want to find out all about Cathy's career and what she's doing now, but we're in for a good treat today. We do get the best guest here. And our podcast is brought to you by Divine Design with Elisa French. As I say every week, we are all going through so much right now. Corona has pretty much flipped our lives upside down, so maybe your mind's not in the right place. You need somebody to erase all the bad stuff and get you in a positive frame. You can call her or text her for a free hour consultation, 509-638-4329, 509-638-4329, and make sure you tell her you heard about us on the Work With Me podcast. And this is the Work With Me podcast on workwithmepodcast.com, 1023 HC2, KKNH, where classic rock lives, kknhradio.com, and Tick Radio, TIKNH, where classic rock lives, kknhradio.com, and Tick Radio, TICradio.com. More affiliates coming soon. So my story to start the show today is going to be a little different. Cathy Hobbs is coming with us, and she's got a good resume of a television station she's done the news for. I, of course, have been on the opposite end, the poor man's television job, radio, for many years. A lot of times people think radio is for people who can't make it on television. You know what? They're probably right. Twice in my career, once recently, I came so close to being on the television. The first time, God, what year was that? 1995. This is my first paid radio job. I'm working at, and I've talked about it before, WIYY Baltimore, 98 Rock. They brought a new morning show in, and because the morning show producer they brought in from St. Louis had to do another job, I was the morning show producer like 6 months. I had a lot of to get up at 4 in the morning, work the morning show all day, and work one or two other jobs. I was crazy then. One day, I'm at an Orioles game, a baseball game, and my pager goes off. For you young kids out there, before cell phones, you would wear a pager, and someone would just call in, you get your beep sound, then you would dial your number, then you would go to a payphone and call the number. So it was the morning show producer, what I was filling in for, saying, hey, we're doing a TV commercial tomorrow, we'd love to have you in it. Hot dog, I'm going to make it on TV. So the whole concept of the TV commercial was we were all, operators, like something you see at a telethon. So we all sat down in our seats, but they decided that every one of us had to have a goofy thing we did. So they brushed my hair over my face so I looked like Cousin Ed. So when the commercial ran, people were calling me, I just saw your commercial, and I saw it on YouTube recently. So all you basically see is a nose, but that was my debut TV gig. 1 or 2 years ago. I worked at a great radio station down the New Jersey shore, 105.7 The Hawk, for 7 years, I think, 7 years. We all got downsized due to Corona, which is happening all over the radio industry. I talked about last week. Best part of this gig was every summer I would broadcast from the boardwalk at Seaside Park or Seaside Heights. It was amazing. It was one of the best radio gigs I ever had. So one holiday, it might have been July 4th or it might have been Memorial Day, I see the Channel 7 WABC New York truck pull up. And I'm always joking around when I see those trucks pull up. So I kept announcing on the air, Channel 7 New York is here, somebody grab me someone. So I noticed the anchor woman is on the beach interviewing people. So I said to my promotions assistant, can you grab her so I can get her on the air? So he was great. He flew to the beach and talked her into coming on the air with me. And it was a beautiful woman, what's her name? Tony Yates. Sunglasses and hugging, and it's just great. I have this new TV crush. And that her Channel 7 records a segment with me. So I'm thinking, unless they run out of time, I'm going to be on the Channel 7 New York News tonight. Yeah! I call and text everybody. Remember, I went to school in New York. I know a lot of people in New York. Watch the 5 o'clock news on Channel 7 tonight. I'm going to be on it. Guess what happened? They didn't cut my segment. They cut everyone's segment. That was the day that woman scaled with the Statue of Liberty or something, and it was breaking news everywhere. It took off the whole 5 o'clock news. So maybe Cathy knows Tony Yates and they can re-air my next segment, but television's come so close to me. Cathy Yates and they can re-air my next segment, but television's come so close to me. Cathy Hobbs is coming up next. We have so much to talk to her about it right after a word from our sponsor. You're listening to the Work With Me podcast, workwithmepodcast.com, 1023 HD2 KKNH, where classic rock lives, and Tick Radio. Hi, it's Bob Stei. Look, anxiety and stress overload is very real, as life as we know it has just been turned upside down. Worldwide pandemic has triggered a stress response that has us feeling like we are falling apart. This roller coaster doesn't seem to stop. If you're experiencing panic attacks and stress burnout, causing a rapid decline in your health and ability to cope, and you've tried reading the books, getting therapy, and adjusting your diet, and yet nothing seems to stop the crushing panic and resulting fatigue, Divine Design with Alicia French can help. Through her own health and stress transformation and 6 years of experience as a functional nutrition practitioner, focused on neuro-emotional balance, helped hundreds of clients get their health and lives back. Call or text her today for a 60-minute consultation. 509-638-4329, 509-638-4329, and tell her Bob Stei sent you.
This is the Work With Me podcast at workwithmepodcast.com.
So Bob, I'm excited to have a client she's become a great friend and someone that I respect so much, Cathy Hobbs from Cathy Hobbs Design Recipes. Cathy, welcome to our Work With Me podcast. So glad to have you with us today.
Thank you for having me.
Absolutely. So Bob, Cathy is an incredible entrepreneur. She is someone who is very focused, driven, goal-oriented, and runs an incredible team in the New York City market. And her company is runs an incredible team in the New York City market. And her company is a staging company, and they do interior design, home staging for some of the largest real estate brokerages in the tri-state area. And what she does is she offers brokers in her staging package the option of hosting property tours, their broadcast quality, and their virtual tours, in addition to interactive virtual 360 tours. So what does that all mean? What it really means is that for the homeowner or the property owner that's working with a broker to help make sure they get the quick sell at the best price, Cathy's company comes in and ensures that that property is staged for high value, quick sell at an incredible offering. So, and they do everything from, maintaining that they have an expansive warehouse. And so they have a very curated collection of furniture, artwork, chandeliers, all of the accessories to really support that luxury property. So again, they can get the best price. But what I want to really talk with Cathy about today is she has such a rich career, and I'm not going to go into it because I want her to tell her own story. But what's so impressive about her, Bob, and why I'm so excited to have her on our podcast today is how she has taken an education and a career and molded it over time to become who she is today and the team that she represents today, working with an incredible company. So rather than trying to understand and help the client or our audience understand who she is, let's just have Cathy help us tell her own story, because who to tell it better than the person who was living it. So I'm going to have you go ahead and Bob and start asking that will help us get to know Cathy better.
Hi, Cathy. First of all, thank you so much for joining us today. We really appreciate it.
Thanks, Bob. I'm really excited to be here. And I always like to talk about career. I always like to talk about business. And I always like to talk about being focused and being motivated and always trying to be your best.
Now, before we jump into your exciting career, tell me a little bit about where you were born, where you grew up, and what did you see yourself doing as an adult?
So I was raised in the Baltimore, Washington, D.C. area. They now call it the DMV. They didn't call it that when I was growing up. A place called Columbia, Maryland, which is actually right in between D.C. and Baltimore.
In Howard County, because I am from Baltimore.
Are you? Well,
Yes.
That's great. That's great. Well, you know, it's when we were living in Baltimore, it wasn't quite as hip as it is now. But lives in the Baltimore area, and they're actually from St. Mary's County, a place called La Plata,
Sure.
which is a little bit more rural. And then when I was in high school, I actually went to high school in suburban Detroit. My father, he was working for a company in which their world headquarters was based in Detroit. So we actually moved to Detroit, and Detroit had a bad name back then. And but let me tell you, I have so many fond memories of Detroit and so many friends who still live in Detroit. And I think that Detroit gets a bad rap. There are a lot of beautiful things about Detroit, and that's where I went to high school. And then I went to college at the University of Southern California, USC. And there I actually studied business, marketing, and finance. I was supposed to be in business, which is kind of my father's background. He was in sales his whole entire career. My mom is a CPA. She's now retired. And so I went to business. She's now retired. And so I went to business school. I went to the Marshall School of Business at USC, and I did several internships, mostly in the financial services industry. I interned at Drexel Burnham Lambert, and I'm actually now dating myself, which was at that point a very profitable firm on the street. And then it ended up going away amidst a scandal. And then just separate from that, I started to wonder what I wanted to do with my life, what I wanted to do as a career, because in college I did business internships every summer. And I literally one day was watching television. I said, being a newscaster looks kind of interesting. And I did think at that point, when I was 19 years old, what could I really see myself doing? I've now done a number of internships in marketing and internships in finance. Is this really what I want to do? Do I really want to be a stockbroker? Do I really want to work in business? And I said, I want to do. Do I really want to be a stockbroker? Do I really want to work in business? And I said, maybe I want to do journalism. And so at that point, it's now my junior year at USC. And I'm making a vast choice to potentially either get a dual degree, a second degree in journalism, or stay the course in the degree that I already had and just try to figure it out with journalism. I did a little bit of both. I applied to the journalism school, got in. I was going to do a dual degree. I would have probably had to stay an extra year. And we were in the first week of USC doing obits. And the teacher, who I still remember his name, but I will protect him for the purposes of this, he called me into the hallway and he said, when you get your first job, you're going to be in the basement of a newspaper. You're going to be doing obits. And I can tell you that I've been in the business 20 years and you'll never make it. You'll never make it in TV. So I dropped the class the next day. And then me being me, picked myself up 2 days later and said, well, I still want to do this, but I had already dropped from the journalism program. So I'm like, what am I going to do? But what happened is back then they didn't have the same kind of computer technology as they have now. So I noticed that they were hiring at the Daily Trojan, the newspaper, and I applied for it, and they only gave it to journalism students. The paper hadn't gotten word that I had dropped from the journalism department, so they gave me the job. And I ended up being one of their top columnists, and they never actually figured out that I wasn't a journalism student. So from there, in my second semester of senior year, I went to a job fair at USC, and it was held by the Hispanic Journalism Association. And it was really supposed to be for Hispanics who were studying in the journalism department. But I said, you know what? They're going to be news directors. And so I went, and everyone was standing in line waiting for the news director from the Los Angeles stations. And there was a little guy who was sitting all by himself, and he was from a small station in Bakersfield. And no one was talking. I went to talk to him. And he sat down. His name was Doug Caldwell. And I want to mention his name because he gave me my first job in television. Doug Caldwell hired me that day. I was 20 years old.
Wow.
I was a senior at USC, and he put me on the air to work at the NBC station in Bakersfield as a senior at USC. What I didn't know is that he hired 4 other people that day. He hired a Hispanic female, an African-American male, a Latin female, and an Asian female. So he was basically bringing some diversity into his newsroom. And the African-American male is still one of my closest friends to this day. It's Jason Carroll of CNN. And he basically from there, I was on the air at age 21. And then from there, I went on to work in Columbia, South Carolina, Nashville, DC, and New York. But I want to mention one thing real quick, because I think it is relevant to people who are looking to change a career and are afraid to take a plunge, take a chance, and wonder what happens if they have a safety net or not. So here I am at USC, and I'm approaching graduation. Because I dropped from the journalism department, I was still majoring in business. I, to this day, have never taken a journalism class. And this is 19 Emmy nominations later, a 20-year career with 5 Emmy wins. I've never taken a journalism class, and the guy who told me I'd never make it, I had the last word. But what I want to say was, I majored in business and never took the journalism class, but I still wanted to pursue journalism. At the time, in the business department, if you wanted to get a job after graduation, there was a day called Meet the Firms. Everybody went. That was the day that you got a suit on, that you stood with a portfolio with your resume in it, and all the companies were there from all the top firms. And the business school, they had a Meet the Firms day, and that's how you got a job out of school. Everybody went. I called my father and I said, I'm not going to go. And he said, well, what do you mean? I said, Dad, I'm going to get a job and I'm going to be distracted. I've decided I want to be a reporter. I said, if I go to Meet the Firms, I'm going to get a job in business. And I've decided that's not what I want to do. Silence. Well, what are you going to do? How are you going to make a job in business? And I've decided that's not what I want to do. Silence. Well, what are you going to do? How are you going to make money? I said, I already have a job. He said, oh, great. What is it? I said, well, I got a job parking cars at the Marriott in Century City. I'm going to be a valet parker until I get my first TV job. He said, you're going to park cars? I said, yeah, that way I have the flexibility. I'm going to make lots of money because I'm going to get tips and everything. Silence again. And he said, I believe in you. My dad died at the age of 50 before he got a chance to see me achieve a lot of my success. But he gave me the push I needed to basically be here today. And I wanted to share that.
Amazing. What an amazing story there. Before I continue, I want to talk a little bit about our Baltimore connection there, which I did not know, which is exciting. I think one advantage you had over me was you got to leave the area.
Maybe it's somewhere deep inside. They call it Baltimore, not even Baltimore, Baltimore. So maybe it's
Baltimore, and that long, because when I went to school in New York in communications, as soon as that long O would hit, people would look at me like an alien, like, oh, I'm going home this weekend. And it was 3 years in New York that got me to get rid of that accent. But funny story you were telling about how all these people were telling me, well, you're not going to make it, or that's not the next move, and he knew better. There was an anchor person in Baltimore. I'm not going to mention his name because he's a good person. And he hosted one of those local morning shows, Good Day Baltimore, or People Are Talking or whatever. And his co-host, his sidekick, he told her one day, she goes, I'm going to leave because I think I have a job opportunity in Chicago. And he's like, well, don't do that. You're not going to make it in Chicago. You're fine, Darren. Yes, Oprah Winfrey.
Yep. And actually that co-host, who, I know his name, he actually went to USC and sat next to me, and he told me not to drop out, but he actually went to USC too, his son, and pursued journalism. So that is a story. Oprah was hosting People Are Talking on Channel 13,
Yeah.
WZ in Baltimore. It was a hit show. She said, "I've got an opportunity to go to Chicago," and the rest is history. You got to take a leap. You got to take a chance sometimes. Also, one of the things I didn't mention, which I think is important, is that the job that I got in Bakersfield paid minimum wage. And the first job that I got after that full time was in Columbia, South Carolina, in which I was paid $15,000 a year. And it was such a little bit of money. I remember my paycheck was $232 every 2 weeks. I had an aunt who lived in Columbia, and that's one of the reasons why I interviewed there. And she gave me, I had free $2 every 2 weeks. I had an aunt who lived in Columbia, and that's one of the reasons why I interviewed there. And she gave me, I had free food, free rent, and I actually had to work as a secretary in a Lutheran church in the morning doing the programs to make ends meet. So I would go to a Lutheran church, and I was the church secretary, literally, and I would do the church programs and fold them up and type them up, and then I would have lunch, and I would go, and I was the reporter on Channel 25, the ABC station in Columbia, South Carolina. So, I also believe in working hard. I believe that things don't happen by accident. And, a lot of times people say, "Oh, you're so successful." Work. Back in high school, I was the last person to go to sleep in my home. I started drinking coffee at the age of 17 because I was trying to stay up to try to get good grades. And so a lot of this, I think,
Before you hit the big time in New York, you had stops in some smaller, medium-sized markets like Columbia, South Carolina, like Nashville. What are some of your favorite memories or stories of working in markets like that?
Well, what was interesting about working in Columbia, South Carolina is there was a clear number one station, and there was a clear number two, and there was a clear number three. And I went to the news director at the number three. I went to the news director at the bottom because I felt that he may think by hiring this young lady from Los Angeles that maybe he was getting a little bit of a prize. So I went to him, and he hired me. The station had a studio that was in a metal building, almost like a shed. And every single time, it seemed that by some happenstance, it was going to rain that night. It would rain right at 11 o'clock as the news was coming on, and it would sound like static on the was coming on, and it would sound like static on the air. It goes shh. So basically, right at 11 o'clock, as the news was opening up, somehow that's when a rainstorm would come, and you would hear it on the air because of the way the studio was built. Small markets are small markets. I think that for me, I think that there's value in working your way up the ladder. I'm very gratified and grateful that I didn't start in New York City. It's difficult to make mistakes in a larger setting, and for people, your supervisors and your bosses, to be forgiving. So I think there's value in starting off in a small company, learning the ropes, growing, getting your stride, learning what works for you and what doesn't work, and almost having a mentor. A lot of the people who hired me when I was younger, they knew that I was young, but they hired me while I was a senior at USC and put me on the air. I was a college student in a newsroom with people who were not college students, who this was their first and second TV job. I was hired at Channel 11 in New York City at the age of 28 in the number one market. And these were, at that point, I had been in television for 7 years, but worked in I worked for NBC when I was in Washington, D.C. I was hired at 25 at WRC in Washington. These are instances where people, they know that you haven't had the level of experience, but they've seen you kind of work your way up. And there were people who I went to. I would knock on the door of a senior correspondent and say, "Do you mind if I pick your brain about the story I'm working on? Do you mind if I learn from you?" And so I definitely encourage young people to seek out mentors, and a lot of people didn't turn me away if I sought there. And so I definitely encourage young people to seek out mentors, and a lot of people didn't turn me away if I sought their advice as a mentor. And I've never turned anyone else down. I've had people actually come up to me and say, you helped me get my job, or you spoke at my school, or you let me interview you for my school newspaper. And I said, I did? So many stories like that. So many stories. And one of my interns is actually the publisher and founder of the Real Deal magazine, which is kind of the Bible of real estate in New York City, Amir Karangi. And he used to carry my tripod when he was at Boston University. And, Amir never forgot. And he has helped me tremendously by opening up doors, because he said I gave him his first job in journalism. So there's a lot to be said for also giving back. And for you being a mentor yourself for those people who are established in their careers. I have an interior design degree from FIT, and basically I always take on every year new talent that comes out of FIT. And one of them is about to become a full-time hire. And that's someone who worked for me for a year, who I developed and helped to grow. And so I think that's something that I would also encourage people, is to help nurture talent. I think it'll come back to you. Nurture talent. I think it'll come back to you.
Cathy, it's like you're reading all my follow-up questions. You're just answering them before they get there. I love it. So I want to go back for a minute to the Bakersfield story. So Buck Owens
oh my gosh, yes. Do you know Buck Owens?
I don't know him personally, but I love, what a talented guy. And remember, he wrote The Streets of Bakersfield. And then Dwight Yoakam now has repopularized that song, but the opening to that song is, I came in here looking for something I couldn't find anywhere else. And it's like you imbibe that lyric that, the Bakersfield took you on, and what an incredible story of how someone gave you an opportunity, and now look at where you are all these years later. Do you know Buck Owens?
I know who he is. I ran into Doug. I ran into him once years after that. But what was interesting about my story is that the person who brought me on in Bakersfield had a vision too that was unique. He didn't hire me full time. He hired me as a weekend reporter. So basically, he was bringing us in a way that was less risky for him. We weren't on the prime time Monday through Friday news. So essentially, I would be a student at USC during the week, and then I would drive up. We'd drive to Kern County. Wow. And we knew that we were in Kern County in Bakersfield when we could smell the oil fields.
Right.
Bakersfield is actually a big oil town, very agricultural. And so we would report the group of us on a weekend newscast, and then we'd go back to LA. So I can't even say that I was really that entrenched with Bakersfield, because I would only drive up to do, to work a shift with Bakersfield, because I would only drive up to do, to work a shift as a reporter in Bakersfield. And then I would drive back to LA. And that's where we were living.
Right. I had driven through Bakersfield so many times.
Yeah.
So many times, and then actually developed a self-storage property there. And I thought, I never imagined actually landing in Bakersfield that solidly, but I did. And so I just kind of chuckle.
Another connection with us, Lorena. We have never talked about Bakersfield.
I know. I grew up on Buck Owens because I grew up in Wyoming, and so it was the hee-haw days and so forth. So, and I also love how you talk about mentoring and really giving back. And so, how would you say, we get how that helps the person, the mentee? How would you say investing and giving back from a C-suite level, how does that help you, and how does that help your business?
It's interesting because I don't really see it as taking a chance.
Mm-hmm.
One of the reasons why I moved up so quickly was because people took a chance on me. And so I always said, I'm fine with taking a chance on someone because people took a chance on me. Using the quick example about Amir Karangi, and I know he won't mind me saying his name, especially if I mention his magazine, The Real Deal. But Amir, the way I kind of came to know him is I was stressed out of my mind. I was 25 working at NBC for the NBC affiliate in O&O in Washington, D.C. And I would go to Elizabeth Arden for massages and for everything. I mean, I was there like almost every other month. And a woman came up to me and she said, my son, he needs an internship. And he's in college and he's majoring in journalism. I said, well, I'll help him. And I went to NBC and he's majoring in journalism. I said, well, I'll help him. And I went to NBC and they said, we don't have any openings for interns. And I came up with the idea. I went to the news director. I said, what if I make him my personal intern? I'm responsible for him. And they said, if you want to take this on, you can. And he was my personal intern. He came in, he went on my stories. I helped him. I told him what I was doing. We went to the tracking booth together. And then fast forward, he would start little publications. He would ask me to give him quotes. And then 20 years ago, he founded the Real Deal Real Estate magazine. And let's just say, whenever you see me in his in the magazine, no money has changed hands for my ads. And so what did I get out of that is that I have the satisfaction, but I also have this network that was built over time, that the seeds were planted because I know about, if you're looking for a career path, connections are going to be your single best resource. My father had worked several jobs, mostly in computer software services as a director of sales. He at one point decided to become an entrepreneur. It didn't work out and he needed a job. And he started handing out, resumes, but he had senior positions, vice president of sales at major companies, Burroughs, Unisys, General Electric. And his resume came across the desk of a CEO in Sacramento. And he said, I know this man. He said, we'll hire him. And he did. So my father got that vice president position because of contacts. If you're someone who, why wouldn't you give someone a chance? Those interns who I helped all the way back when, and many of them are now acts. If you're someone who, why wouldn't you give someone a chance? Those interns who I helped all the way back when, and many of them are now anchors in top markets. And if I ever need a job, they'd say, oh, Cathy helped me. She's a good person. And I think that's what you're gonna get out of it, is an expanded network. And also they bring such a fresh approach. Someone who is young, they're eager. I have actually had more success nurturing and grooming talent than I have recruiting through traditional channels. Because even though somebody looks great on paper, even though someone looks great in an interview, at the end of the day, you really don't know if you're going to blend with that person. When I bring in someone who I can watch and groom, at the point that I'm bringing them on as a full-time hire, they've worked for me for at least a year. Loyal in a way that I think that someone else isn't, that isn't involved in that side of that sort of mentor-mentee type of relationship.
And I can attest to the truth that you actually do mentor these interns. It's not a position that they're just sitting at a desk somewhere. You actually do mentor them. And so for the mentee and for you, I think that's also the big difference when we talk about interns, is how are they going to get mentored and how are they going to grow?
And I don't even call them internships. I actually say that it's actually not an internship. It's a part-time job with an enormous amount of responsibility. I don't even call it an internship. And I tell people I don't even do interns, because when you say intern, some people, they see a lack of ownership and a lack of being part of the team. Oh, I'm just an intern. I tell them it's not an internship. It's a part of the team. Oh, I'm just an intern. I tell them it's not an internship. It's a part-time position.
Right. Now I want to move now to New York, and Cathy, right now there's plenty to say about New York, and there's the belief and also in truth a lot going on right now. Crime is up, drugs, homelessness. To some of us who are in the city, it feels like we're back to the 70s. But you love New York, and you've chosen to still stay very invested as a business owner in New York. So can you tell me your perspective on that?
Well, I moved to New York in the mid 90s, and that was a transitional time. Giuliani was still the mayor. It was after Dinkins. And people can have, whatever opinion they have about that time in New York City history. And then I was there, of course, through Bloomberg now De Blasio. And I was a reporter during Giuliani and Bloomberg. I was a New York City reporter during that time because I was at WPIX for over a decade, for 12 years. I think that New York is going through an unprecedented transition that is in some ways even more impactful to potentially the fiber of New York beyond 9/11. It's a trickle down effect that I see with the things that you mentioned. With 9/11, for example, there was a rally around the heroes who were there that day. The people who went in to try to rescue people, just a togetherness about we made it through. Everyone knew someone who passed away, who was working near in the towers. Now I feel that there is almost a division of people who are choosing to stay behind and people who are choosing to flee. There is a certain there are people who have decided we're, I'm out. This is the end for my journey in New York. Honestly, my own brother, he I said, David, it's the end of an era. He packed up and he moved 2 weeks ago, and he had been in New York before I moved to New York. He had moved to New York in 1995, so he's been in New York for 25 years. Now he was he was anti-moving from New York. This is a kid who was raised in the suburbs, right? He raised 2 kids in the city. And then now he actually decided to get a house as the kids are out of school. And I said, well, why didn't you get the house when the kids could be in the house and have the land and all that and, have room to grow when they were in school? He said, I wanted to stay in the city. He said, but now I have concerns as he has, kids in college, that if kids in college, that if the schools shut down again, that I want them to have a place to come and have room and study and things like that. So now seems the right time. I think people are going to have to make now seems the right time. I think people are going to have to make a decision about what really works best for them and their own families, and I always respect that with New York. I think that what I am seeing what we haven't mentioned is the fact that you did Larundi, but at the beginning, but that I own a home staging company in which we specialize in real estate staging and styling. We are seeing such a rush of people who are signing up for staging in order to make their properties competitive. We signed 4 contracts in the last weekend alone, and we're booked right now a month out. And so what I'm seeing is that people are selling Manhattan, but also, and I was talking to a number of agents this morning and presenting to their office, people are buying. And I think that what that says is that New York will remain a special place. It will remain resilient. Now is actually a great time to invest in New York City, real estate. It's unlike other markets. I mean, people bought in, let's say, Las Vegas at one point, and then they saw their money, dwindle. I don't think that'll happen with New York.
It's interesting. So do we just need the hero mentality back in our mindset that will help us stay connected to New York, which is still an incredible city?
Well, I think that, the young lady that I'm about to hire full-time, she is just part of that class of 2020 from college. And then my own niece is part of the class of 2020 that is now in their freshman year in college, and she graduated high school in 2020. And I think that they'll be known as the COVID class. I think that the class of 2020 will be known as the COVID class. And I think that there'll always be some sort of bond resilience known as the COVID class. And I think that there'll always be some sort of bond resiliency. We did it, and I think that maybe there'll be a shared commonality, that will be maybe something they'll talk about at cocktail parties. Oh, what year did you graduate? 2020. Oh, you were the COVID class. And maybe there'll be like a phoenix rising out of the ashes for some of these kids. I think that they're destined to do great things because of what they experienced.
Amazing. So I want to move for a moment to, you opened Cathy Hobbs Design Recipes in 2003. Is that the correct? I think they had that.
Yeah.
Right. So tell us about the vision that inspired you to launch that company, out of media into a staging company. What was that arc about?
Well, I don't want to come across as someone who I started the company, but what I left out was the fact that in 1999 was when I enrolled at FIT in the interior design program. At that point, it was a hobby. I didn't know where it would lead. So I would go to FIT in the morning and attend classes, and then I would cover fires and shoot 'em ups at night. And I would show up at Channel 11 at night because I worked the evening news, the 3 to 11 shift, and I didn't know where it was going to go. I was not leaving that cushy reporter job. I just showed up every day for my class at FIT, and then I would go to Channel 11 and I would report the news. And it was my private business. I didn't share it with everyone. It was like my pottery class. They didn't need to know that in my spare time that I was getting a second degree. And so what ended up happening is at one point they wanted to change my shift at Channel 11, and so what ended up happening is at one point they wanted to change my shift at Channel 11, and the secretary for the news director, she did know my secret, and she said, "Why do you want to change Cathy's schedule?" And the news director said, and her name was Karen Scott, and she is a wonderful person, and I do want to mention her. She said, "Why don't you want to change your shift?" And I said, "I'm in school." And she said, "Wow, I didn't know that." She said, "I knew that you weren't sleeping till 2, but I actually value education." She said, "Forget I asked, we won't change your shift." And had she changed my shift, I would have never been able to finish. And so I kept going. And in the midst of it came the Williamsburg, Brooklyn development boom. And my husband and I were looking for an apartment at the time. We were newlyweds, and this was 2003, and someone hired me to do new developments, a model apartment. And I was still doing the news. I did the model apartment. And so for basically the first morning when I didn't have to go into the newsroom, because I didn't have to go to the newsroom until 3, the shift was 3 to 11, and I would start a staging, and then I would go into the news station, then I'd continue it the next day. And then I got an assistant, but I would basically run that business from the back of a live truck for the first 7 years. In 2009 was a big transition for me. I got the opportunity to host my own show, my own real estate show at the station. And at that point, there was a conflict between me doing the news and me doing a real estate and design show. And at that point, I essentially gave up the news job, which was very difficult for me. I did have my husband who was supportive in any way that counts. I mean, I knew that I had that financial cushion, I had that mental cushion, and I had him on my back basically saying, "Go, Cathy, go. Go, Cathy, go." And I had that mental cushion, and I had him on my back basically saying, "Go, Cathy, go. Go, Cathy, go." And he still is doing that. He always says, "I support you so I can retire." So what ended up happening is he said, "You got 2 years to make this work. And if you don't make this work, whatever it is that you want to do, whatever this design staging thing is, unfortunately, you're going to have to get a job and to help out." And most reporters go on to do public relations for hospitals and things like that. There's nothing wrong with that, it just didn't appeal to me. So I wanted to try to make the design work. What I also did at the time in 2009, if you can remember the economy in 2009, a lot of people are out of jobs. I said, you know what? He's he's not threatening me, but he's giving me an ultimatum. I have 2 years. At that point, my company really, I mean, we were on fumes because of the economy. And I went to a job fair. It was held at Baruch College. And I was like, let me thing. And I went like this. I said, I got to make this work. I got to make this work. And what I ended up doing was auditioning for a reality show. When I was reporting the news, a lot of times instant fame was the person who had been on a reality show at the time. You know, all the reporters would be on the red carpet, and the PR person would say, up next is, you know, so-and-so, and we would say, who? She was on season 1 of Survivor. And we're like, oh, okay. And I realized that being on a reality show kind of gives you an elevated lift. So I auditioned for HGTV Design Star, which at the time was the reality show to be on. 7,000 people auditioned for season 6, and they only chose 12 designers. And I kept getting a call every Friday, you're on to the next round, you're on to the next round. At one point, everyone had to submit a tape, a resume tape of them. I was like, I got a tape of them. I was like, I got this. I was in the middle of Times Square. I started out in the middle of Times Square. Then I was in front of a police precinct saying that for 20 years, this was me. And then I was in front of FIT. And then I decided to go to design school. And then I ended up in my apartment with my husband. And he speaks German. We spoke German. And then we showed our baby. And it was like, great. And then I got on to the next round. And then the final round was 35 people who were called into CBS studios, and that was it. That was going to decide who was on. And they had us do like a design, and then the last thing was a questionnaire, which was, do you know how to use a drill? Do you know how to use all this power equipment? Do you know how to do it? And I checked, no. Do you know how to use a drill? No. Do you know how to use a saw? No. And my husband's like, you should have said yes. I was cast the next day. So I was cast as the toughest nails, hard news, New York City reporter who didn't even know how to turn on. They didn't show it in the episode, but I had to ask someone how to turn it on. I had to ask a fellow designer how to turn on the drill.
Cathy, you're always so filled with such amazing, great stories. And we have some more connection points because I also got married in 2003. And 2009 was a big shift for me. It's when I moved from Utah to New York to kind of start again. So we have some additional connections that we didn't even, connection points we didn't even know about. I want to ask you one more question before I turn the time back over to Bob. And that is that video was part of your business, right? The design business, that's been an integral part to what you've done. Has that helped you in this COVID period to offer value exponentially, right? So you and I are both also Tony Robbins students.
Yes.
It's always about, incredible, irresistible offer. So how do you use been such a big differentiator for you and the value you offer for your clients?
Well, you mentioned one thing, and I just want to touch upon it really quickly, Robbins, with the create an irresistible offer. And I mentioned that in this current climate, people are looking to differentiate themselves however they can as it relates to selling their property. Not only am I selling my property, but I have 10 other people in my same building who are selling as well. And that really is the climate. There are some buildings that have 10 and 12 and 20 apartments that are all on the market. So what I did during COVID is I got up every single day, no later than 7:30. And I started making calls, and some people responded. It was a really dark time. Some people needed that private time, and I respected that. But some people said, sure, I'm around, let's talk. And I asked them what they were going to need out of COVID. And these are my real estate agents. These are clients who I trusted their opinions. And they said 2 things. Number 1 is, I think we're going to need video. And number 2, I trusted their opinions. And they said 2 things. Number 1 is, I think we're going to need video. And number 2, we have to be able to show a property virtually without someone stepping in the door. We have to be able to give people enough information that they can then move forward on a transaction, even though they've never stepped foot in the door, which would have been unheard of. And the reason why we have to do that, and real estate has to do that, is because number 1, in the case of an occupied, someone lives in the property, there are some sellers who really don't want people to be in their homes right now. And I think that that may be going forward. They don't want the open house. They don't want people touching their different things in their home. So, but they still need to sell. There are buyers now who are needing to see properties remotely. They live out of town. There are different nuances that make that virtual experience even more critical. 11 under the umbrella of my staging company. So now my company is a unique hybrid in which we offer staging and in-house production for one price as a value add. How can we be competitive? How can we be even more competitive? And so what's interesting is that I know of at least one competitor who is offering virtual video services. But you know what? Sometimes you have to ask yourself, is it really authentic to the brand? Is this person really an expert in television? Everybody who knows me knows that I am an expert, and it's more trusted that the person who did TV for 20 years and continues to do TV and has had a production company prior to COVID is doing it. So people really resonate with that. Right now, the video component is important, not only as it relates to the virtual tour that I just mentioned, but also the 360 experience, which involves someone being able to go through various touch points and be able to move around the space. We're also, which involves someone being able to go through various touch points and be able to move around the space. We're also right now talking to a couple of people in Europe about virtual reality. My production people understand it. You know, I'm still old school. Still want to try to figure things out. I like to have things I can really touch and feel. That's because I really feel that I need that in order to sell it. I need to understand it. And that's kind of the way I was always with reporting. I needed to, in order for me to be able to explain it to millions of people, I had to really understand it. So, but what we're thinking and what we're seeing is a move towards not only 360, but actually virtual reality, which means that you can either through your iPad or iPhone, or even with the glasses, you can actually feel like you're in the property. So I think that we've made a whole shift in technology. I remember the first time I ever saw someone with a cell phone. You know, and at that point I thought, wow, look at the phone that they have. When I was on my reporting job in Nashville, they had a cell phone, a station cell phone that was in a bag. Now I'm really dating myself. It was in a bag. The cell phone was in a bag.
I had one of those.
Bob had a cell phone bag, but you know, guys, I can't make this up. There are going to be people who are listening to this who are going to say, what? But right. Basically, cell phone in a bag, folks, in which you plugged it into your cigarette charger, right. And that was the cell phone. So
you had to wrap the cord around the antenna of the car to get any reception.
Right. It was a jury-rigged concept, but the concept of even having a personal phone was foreign back then. I think that virtual meetings, virtual ways of presenting and display product, whether it's your own business product, whether it's your own business product or real estate. I think that this is going to be the trend from here forward. 2020 is going to be the kickoff for virtual. And so if you don't have a great way of presenting that in a virtual platform, then I think that you're going to be behind the eight ball. And right now, what that is video.
Mm-hmm. So true. So true. So, Bob, I'm going to go ahead and ask the final questions, then you can take Cathy into the Stranded Island segment. Mm-hmm. So one of the things that you talked about was really focusing in on as a young person, or actually anyone in your career, if you want to elevate, take calculated, well-educated risks, which is really, I think, a great example. Elevate and continue to grow. What's the best advice that you could give to them, Cathy?
You know, I really believe in, YOLO. You only live once. Mm. Why not? What would be, to me, it'd be more harmful to wake up one day and say, how did I get here? Right? This isn't where I expected to be. This isn't what I wanted. What happened to the dream that I had all those years ago? Why didn't I do it? I can honestly say that I pursued every dream that I wanted. And if I got knocked down, I was just going to get back up. So to me, why not?
Mm-hmm. Amazing. Bob, take us to our stranded island. I want to hear this.
Absolutely. And you are listening to the Work With Me podcast. We're lucky enough to have Cathy Hobbs with us on workwithmepodcast.com. And I can finally say this, Work With Me podcast. We're lucky enough to have Cathy Hobbs with us on workwithmepodcast.com. And I can finally say this as well, also on 102.3 HD2 KKNH, where classic rock lives, and Tick Radio. How was that, Cathy? Was that good?
Honestly, Bob, did you ever do professional radio?
30 years now.
I can tell.
Thank you.
You don't lose it. You don't lose it.
I can. What's funny is, before I get to these questions, you had mentioned the YOLO. I am so old and out of it that I was with my family in Ocean City, Maryland, maybe 6 years ago.
We're Atlantic City. We were in Atlantic City family because my dad was from Philly, but I know Ocean City.
And I keep hearing people say that all week. I had to go to Google and find out what that meant.
That may be a problem, Bob. You must not be living YOLO then.
No.
There you go. Well, doing this podcast, I can tell you this was a dream for Bob that we've been able to make come true. You talk about giving employees opportunities. So hopefully listen, we all survived the brick phones, right? Remember the brick phones when we graduated, we could take it out of our car. If we could survive the brick phone, we can survive anything, I would say.
Now, Cathy, I'm going to put you on the stranded island now, which is strange because someone like you who's a reporter and loves people, that's got to kill you. But if you're on this stranded island and you can have just one of the following, which food or cuisine would you eat the rest of your life?
Man, I love a good pate, a good foie gras. I think I'd like a really amazing bottle of white wine.
Ah. What about one book? You can only have one book on this island, so you can keep opening it as many times as you want.
I've been reading a lot of books lately on self-help. I'd say one of the two that stand out to me was a modern Dale Carnegie version of Dale Carnegie's book. Basically, they were talking about how to be genuine, you actually have to smile from the teeth in, and most people smile from the teeth out, which was interesting. So maybe that book, maybe Dale Carnegie, a classic, how to win friends and influence people.
What about a movie?
Purple Rain, huge Prince fan.
Good one. What about a TV show or series?
Scandal.
Oh my gosh, see, there's another one.
I'm totally Olivia Pope, just really in control, it's considerate, handled, basically, and that's my tribe. They're like over a cliff, so I am Olivia Pope. 100%.
Here's my favorite for her, and I think it's congruent with the work that we do. What do you want?
What's the end game?
Right? What
do
you want? Yep.
What's the end game?
Do you want?
What's the end game?
Right? What
do
you want? Yep.
What's the end game?
One artist or musician to listen to.
Prince,
of course.
That's my man. And Prince loved Detroit. So when I was in high school, Prince would play the Masonic Temple and Cobo Arena. If anyone is listening who's from the D, you know what I'm talking about.
Yeah, I'm sorry, Bob. I'm so glad, Cathy, you talked about Detroit, because I agree with you that it's a city, for whatever reason, for a very long time has been overlooked. And I think it's a great city on many levels. So I'm so glad that you talked about that and your love for it. So yeah, anyone who's listening from Detroit, we love you.
Yep. And as you're listening, you can see there is 0 degrees of separation between Cathy and Larindi. And now that we were talking about Oprah and WJZ in Baltimore, there is 0 degrees of separation between us. It is such a small world. Cathy.
We provide, and you can also find a lot of my videos on YouTube. It kind of goes through some of my even design tips. I give away a lot of freebies, but cathyhobbs.com is the best place to go.
Cathy, it has been our pleasure. This has been a lot of fun. Thank you so much for hanging with us today.
Thank you for having me. I truly enjoyed it. And everyone, live your best life, take a chance, and you will be rewarded for it.
Thank you for listening to the Work With Me podcast. with Bob Stei and Lorindy Ruse. Original score by Mark Ruse. The show has been edited and produced by Bob Stei. If you have a comment, would like to advertise, be a guest or an affiliate of the Work With Me podcast, email bob@ruseadvisors.com. Copyright 2020 Ruse Advisors.